Several attempts were made by the UN to prepare and supervise a referendum in the Sahara between 1967 and 1974. But the Spanish government, still under the Franco regime, kept voting against the UN resolutions. Meanwhile, a group of Sahrawi students who were studying in Marrakesh requested the King of Morocco, Hassan II, for financial and logistical support to fight the Spanish occupiers, which was refused due to Morocco's preference for diplomatic rather than violent solutions to solve the issue. These students would later formally create the Polisario Front, standing for the Popular Front for the Liberation of the Saga al-Hamra and Rio de Oro. The newly formed Polisario would begin to launch attacks on several Spanish outposts. Their power would grow as more and more tropas nomadas, former Spanish auxiliary forces comprised of Sahrawi tribesmen, began deserting and joining the Polisario, bringing weapons and training with them. Spain continued stalling, claiming that the Western Sahara was terra nullius, or nobody's land, when it occupied it. Therefore, Spain believed that Morocco and Mauritania had no claims over the territory. This claim was disputed by the two countries, leading to consulting the International Court of Justice, which issued an advisory opinion in October 1975, denying the Spanish claims that Western Sahara was a nobody's land, and that legal ties of allegiance did exist between the Sultan of Morocco and some of the tribes living in the territory of the Western Sahara. But the Court of Justice ultimately found that this data was not enough to prove a claim of Moroccan sovereignty over the disputed territory, and expressed its support for the principle of self-determination. In early November 1975, an event that would be a turning point in the story was taking shape. The King of Morocco, Hassan II, gave a rallying speech stressing the need to liberate the Western Sahara from Spanish occupation, after the UN efforts did not yield any concrete results. 350,000 unarmed Moroccans responded to the call. A march of enormous proportions converged in the city of Tarfaya, previously known as Cape Juby, and began crossing into the Spanish-held Sahara, holding the Moroccan flags and the Quran, banners calling for the return of the Moroccan Sahara. The color green for the march's name was intended as a symbol of Islam and peace. This caught Spain off guard, as the country was in a political crisis. Franco, who ruled Spain for 36 years, was in a coma, and the country was in no position to start another colonial war. As the marchers reached the border, the Spanish armed forces were ordered not to fire to avoid bloodshed. Spain would then agree to enter negotiations with Morocco and Mauritania, leading to the Madrid Accords of the 14th of November. The treaty divided Spanish Sahara between Mauritania and Morocco. Morocco and Mauritania then formally annexed the parts they were assigned in the Accords. Morocco was given control over the northern parts, the Saga al-Hamra, and approximately half of Rio de Oro, while Mauritania proceeded to occupy the southern third of the country. Algeria, still harboring discontent after the Sahara War, did not like the fact that it was not consulted in the Madrid Accords, especially that it had hopes of gaining an outlet to the Atlantic Ocean through the Western Sahara. The Madrid Accord would not go down well with the Polisario, who now had the support of Algeria and had access to the Soviet weapons and training. On December 11, 1975, the first Moroccan troops arrived in Laayoune, and fighting erupted with the Polisario. At the same time, the battles of La Guera and Tishla took place when the Mauritanian army moved to the southern part of the Western Sahara, according to its agreement with Spain. Following an infiltration of heavily armed Algerian soldiers into the oasis of Amgala, inside the Moroccan territory, Morocco sent troops to repel the attack. The Battle of Amgala lasted for 36 hours, after the Algerian forces retreated behind their borders. The Polisario would go then to proclaim the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic on the 27th of February 1976 and create a government in exile inside Algerian territories. The Polisario Front retaliated the Moroccan offensives with guerrilla attacks, and moved their base to Tindouf in western Algeria, where the first refugee camps were established in May 1976. The Polisario moved tens of thousands of Sahrawi people into the Tindouf refugee camps, where they would be trapped indefinitely. For the next 2 years, the Polisario movement had expanded to thousands of armed fighters, as Algeria and Libya, under Gaddafi, supplied arms and funding. Kim Il-sung, the founder and dictator of North Korea, also provided support to the Polisario Front as they shared similar ideologies. On the other front, Mauritania continued to wage 4 years of war against the Polisario guerrillas. In December 1977, France intervened after French civilian technicians were taken as hostages in a Polisario raid on the Zouirat iron ore mines. The French Air Force deployed Jaguar jets to Mauritania in 1978, which repeatedly bombed Polisario columns with napalm. The Polisario Front launched a raid on the capital Nouakchott, during which Polisario leader El Wali was killed and was replaced by Mohamed Abdelaziz. The Mauritanian regime of Ould Dada still proved unable to fend off the guerrillas, and his disastrous performance in the war was a major reason for the Mauritanian armed forces' decision to overthrow him a year later. After a coup d'etat that deposed the president, Mauritania finally withdrew in the summer of 1979, when they signed the Algiers Agreement with the Polisario Front and renounced any claims on the Western Sahara. After the departure of the Mauritanian forces, Morocco annexed those territories in August 1979. The Moroccan government proposed a national referendum to determine the Saharan territory's sovereignty in 1981. The referendum was to be overseen by the Organization of African Unity, but the proposal failed as they would not reach agreement over referendum procedures. The Organization of African Unity admitted the SADR as a member in 1982, which Morocco considered as a challenge to its territorial integrity, and subsequently left the Union in 1984. The repeated infiltrations and guerrilla surprise attacks by the Polisario pushed Morocco to build a 2,700-kilometer-long earthen wall that divides the Moroccan-administered portion of the Western Sahara from that held by the Polisario Front. The Moroccan army stationed troops in military posts, stretched along the sand wall with minefields in between, to deter infiltrations by the Polisario militias. This put the war on hold, with no side able to achieve decisive gains. But artillery strikes and sniping attacks by guerrillas continued. On 24 February 1985, the Polar 3, a German research airplane from the Alfred Wegener Institute, was shot down by guerrillas of the Polisario Front over the Western Sahara. All 3 crew members died. Polar 3, together with unharmed Polar 2, were on their way to Antarctica and had taken off in Dakar, Senegal, to reach the Canary Islands. On the 7th of October 1989, Polisario launched a massive attack against Moroccan troops in Ghouta Zemmour, but sustained heavy casualties and withdrew after leaving dozens of tanks and armored vehicles burning. In order to resolve the sovereignty issue, the UN had attempted to hold a referendum through the United Nations Mission for the Referendum in Western Sahara, or MINURSO, and is holding direct talks between the Kingdom of Morocco and the Polisario Front. After the intervention of the UN in 1991, a ceasefire was signed between the factions, effectively freezing the conflict. A referendum was then supposed to take place in 1992, but this never happened, as both parties did not agree over who could claim Sahrawi ethnicity and who would be allowed to vote on Western Saharan independence. The former US Secretary of State James Baker was named the UN envoy to the Western Sahara, and he was tasked with drafting a peace plan. For the first time, he succeeded in bringing the Moroccans and Sahrawis face to face in June 2002. The plan proposed a period of autonomy for the Western Sahara under provisional Moroccan sovereignty, followed by a referendum through which Sahrawi settlers would vote on either the integration with Morocco or independence. The plan was accepted by Morocco, but was refused by the Polisario Front. Another plan put forward by Baker also failed. Upon the death of King Hassan II, the new monarch Mohammed VI realized that the previous referendum attempts were not realistic, and in 2006 gave a new proposition for self-governance, which means that the Sahrawi regions would have their own government and their own parliament, under the sovereignty of the Moroccan kingdom, and in accordance with the Moroccan constitution. This was a diplomatic solution which many great powers welcomed, but unfortunately, the Polisario refused this proposition, which led down to the breakdown of the Manhattan negotiations of 2007. In April 2009, 229 members of the US House of Representatives called on President Obama to support Morocco's autonomy plan and to assist in drawing the conflict to a close. The signers acknowledged that the Western Sahara has become a recruiting ground for radical Islamists. These fears would prove prophetic, as one of the members of the Polisario, after receiving his training there, would leave Tindouf and head to northern Mali to join the Katiba Tariq ibn Ziyad, a unit of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghrib. In 2011, the same person, Adnan Abu Walid al-Sahrawi, would found the Movement for Oneness and Jihad in West Africa, alongside other Malians and Mauritanian extremists. Al-Sahrawi would soon become one of its most senior members and official spokesman. 2 years later, he would meet Mukhtar bil-Mukhtar, an Algerian terrorist leader of Al-Mulathamin group, and merge both their groups in August 2013 to form Al-Murabitun. Fast forward to 2015, ISIS is now controlling vast territories in Iraq and Syria, and calling terrorists from all over the world to join their jihad. Al-Sahrawi soon declared his allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi on May 13, 2015, and formed the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. This group is primarily based in Mali, operating along the Mali-Niger border, and has claimed responsibility for several attacks under al-Sahrawi's leadership, including the October 4, 2017 attack on a joint US-Nigerian patrol in the region of Tongo in Niger, which killed 4 US soldiers and 5 Nigerian soldiers. The US Department of State's Rewards for Justice program is offering a reward of up to $5 million for any information leading to the identification or location of Adnan Abu Walid al-Sahrawi. After Morocco's return to the African Union in 2017, various countries built new consulates in the 2 Sahrawi cities of Laayoune and Dakhla, recognizing the sovereignty of Morocco over the Sahara as the most reasonable solution for stability in the region. In December 2020, the US officially recognized Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara and opened a consulate in the city of Laayoune. Several other countries followed its lead. At the same time, another agreement between the Moroccan and Israeli governments was taken place in order to resume diplomatic relations and launch direct flights between the two countries. An important step for peace and to connect the Jewish diaspora community in Israel, which migrated from Morocco in the 50s and 60s with their ancestral home. Following these events, the Polisario retaliated by breaching the terms of the ceasefire and launching an attack on the unpatrolled crossing of Gargarat, a buffer zone at the southern borders of Morocco that was cleared from Moroccan soldiers in 2017. Since then, the Polisario continued to provoke and disturb the region, stopping shipments from crossing the borders, and the Moroccan authorities continued to send complaints to the UN and to the MINURSO without any replies. After the failures to resolve these provocations diplomatically, the Moroccan forces had to intervene to pacify the situation and to resume traffic. The Moroccan government has been actively engaged in investing in the Sahara, building infrastructures, creating job opportunities, and providing amenities and food to the population, since minimal rainfall in the territory inhibits any agricultural production. Fuel is sold at half the price there, and basic goods are heavily subsidized. Businesses operating in the territory do not pay taxes. In addition to the Dakhla Atlantic port, Morocco's new development model for the south includes several wind farms and other social infrastructures across Western Sahara. Unfortunately, while 500,000 Sahrawis who are living on the Moroccan side of the Sahara benefit from this, almost 100,000 of their relatives are still held in refugee camps on the other side, under Polisario's influence, where corruption and human rights violations continue unseen. We will know their story in the third and final part in this series.